that was a complete change of both our patterns. And so what happens, even if you decide that, even if you were left, even if you were cheated on, even if you just decide that you're going to change how you orient towards endings, you're changing a pattern. And just by doing that, you're starting to build self-trust. You're starting to say, hey, when shit hits the fan, or when life shows up in a way that's unexpected, I actually have my own back, and I'm actually willing to learn from this.
Okay, we're live. So let's do this thing. Welcome, everybody. This has been there, felt that. It is our first podcast. We are a show that dives deep into the relationships that shape us, break us, and ultimately transform our lives. And I am here with my co-founder, my brother from another mother, one of my closest, dearest friends at this point, Mr. Mark Groves. Well,
at this point, better stay that way. Unbelievable.
No. I'm saying, like, at this point, you've become not just a co-founder, but a close friend. I'm
excited to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
The inaugural.
It is the inaugural. And I do want to say, because, we're a company that believes in honesty and transparency, that this was pretty impromptu because, well, why don't you tell them what is about to potentially happen in your life? Maybe even will happen by the time people hear this.
Likely will happen by the time people hear this. So this is capturing a moment in time where I'm not yet a father, but I am inevitably going to be one very soon, which is kind of wild to consider that my phone at any time could be like, yo, you got to get home. We're having a baby, which is pretty cool. I'm ready. I'm ready to rock.
Are you ready? I think that's a great place to start, because it's, to be honest, something that scares the shit out of me is parenthood, fatherhood. So yeah, like where are you at? Because this is a crazy moment for us to capture right now.
Yeah, I got asked last week if I was ready, and I'm like, well, I think I'm as ready as you can be for something you've never done. Like I've done all the training to prepare for this moment through interpersonal relationships, and what I am learning just from observing being in a relationship with my nephew. Did I hear music?
Bro, is that you or me? It's like, it sounds like...
That wasn't me.
It sounds like a shofar. I don't know. I'm in New York City, so it's hard to know. Yeah, by the way, for all my non-Jews listening, a shofar is a big bone horn they blow into at the high holidays. Anyways, I digress. Back to you.
No, mazel tov, bro. Mazel tov. Yeah, there's the relationships really prepare us for that. I think they can to be a parent, and observing my relationship with my nephew has been really interesting because he's 15 months old now, 16 months, and just witnessing like that I want him to do things a certain way. Like I can see myself wanting him to get things right, even though like to him, there's no right or wrong. There's just being with the world and playing with the world. And, I was interviewing Dr. Shafali, the parenting psychologist. She wrote a book on conscious parenting. Yep. And she was saying, I had said to my nephew, oh, let's go play, in his little playroom. And he's like, no. Well, what do you mean, no? Like you're
right. Yeah.
You're freaking 15 months old. Your whole life should be about play. What are you saying no to your uncle?
Yeah.
And I just laughed, and I told her this story, and she said to me that what he's not rejecting me. What he's bringing up in me is an unprocessed rejection that I've experienced that I'm now living through him. And I was like, oh shit. Like this is real. I thought romantic relationships were a mirror. And now I'm like, damn, my kid's going to bring up all my stuff, which I think is a gift.
I mean, I always tell my friends this, and, I don't know if this resonates, but I feel like you get to 18, you're like kid to 18, and your parents are just fucking you up. And then 18 till you die, you're kind of trying to unravel all of the things that, and
then fucking your kids up till
right.
they're 18.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
Pass on the torch.
the hope is you fuck them up a little bit less because you've, done some of the work.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's part of the, process of maturation and adulting is taking responsibility for the things you were handed. And that doesn't mean that it's shitty that we get handed some things. But, we got to do something with it. It might not be our fault, but it is our responsibility. And I think it is incumbent upon a self-aware adult to actually heal and navigate their relational challenges. Because, there's a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh, I think that's how you say his name, where he says, "To love without knowing how to love is to wound those we love." And I think that's a very powerful statement. To operate in relationship, knowing your limitations and knowing some of your behaviors cause harm to not just yourself, but to other people, is actually, I would say, out of integrity. And that's a whole, we're really in that statement inviting a whole nother level of integrity, which is to say, if we want to be in a productive relationship, in a productive family, a productive society, we have to heal the things. And, inevitably your child is going to have wounds. But I don't think the sign of a perfect parent or the sign of a perfect childhood is to be woundless. It's to be empowered to move through those wounds. And as a parent, to not try to rob your child of the experience of the frictions of life that prepare them to have grit and resilience and to know they can. And I think we're in the product of helicopter parenting. Actually, I heard a term the other day, bulldoze parenting.
Yeah.
Or shovel parenting, something like that. Have you heard that?
I don't know. No, but I mean,
it's about clearing the way. So the parent it's worse than chopper parenting, where you're just hovering over like, oh, don't do that. Don't touch that. Watch that.
Right.
It's like bulldozing out of the way all of life's challenges, which are really gifts some of the time, not all the time. And I thought that's really interesting. Like, how do you sit with not wanting your child to experience suffering and at the same time know that suffering has been the greatest gateway to our own evolution and self-inquiry? It's a strange paradox.
I mean, I think that is the scariest part of the journey of parenting, which is you can do, or think you do, everything right. And granted, I'm speaking from the place of not being a parent, but, from watching the own evolution of my childhood and friends who are becoming parents. And, you could do everything that you think, quote unquote, is right. And your kids are, it's inevitable that your kids are going to have wounding and damage. It's funny. This is not really what I thought we were going to talk about today, but it seems like such a fertile moment.
Pun intended.
Hey now.
Hey, yo.
We talk about all things relationships, including being highly fertile on the podcast.
Yeah. The seeds of expansion. I like it.
I'm just thinking that, you've probably got all these, maybe not preconceived notions, but there's probably some expectations going into this, right? Going into like having a kid. I know you're pretty evolved, so I assume you're pretty good at trying to release some of the expectations. But I'm curious, as you sit here, potentially waiting for a phone call that could be any minute. That's like, yo, get over here. You're about to have a kid. Like, what are some of the expectations you have? Because I know we're going to do this again eventually, and how fun and interesting to revisit this.
Right. Part 2. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the expectations, I guess, are not knowing, like having an expectation that my life is going to be severely disrupted, but not in a bad way. I don't mean disruptive in a way that I'm not open to, but knowing that I have no clue what is actually on the other side of what does the reshuffling of life look like, to include having a being that I'm responsible for or partially responsible for. That's part of it. I mean, I've been really also the pressure to provide and take care of a family. I mean, that's how do you balance it all? I don't know, because I've never balanced it all. I already find life hard sometimes valid,
Right.
you know? So it's like, how do you, I do notice that I have a bit more of a ferocity about what world my child's being brought into and what I'm going to allow for that child, and you know, what I support and what I'm open and curious to and what I don't. I think there's a saying that you give the best parenting advice until you're a parent. So we have to capture this moment so I can still give good parenting advice till I'm a parent. And then it's
my gosh, I can't even imagine. I can't imagine. It's really crazy. I mean, it is there. It's funny in business, you know, I don't remember who came up with this, but maybe it was Jeff Bezos or something, but he said there are, you know, level 1 decisions or type 1 decisions and type 2 decisions. And, you know, type 2 decisions are the decisions that you can mostly delegate or let other people make, which are things that, you know, you make a decision and it might be difficult to reverse, but ultimately they're all doors you can walk back through. But I mean, having a kid is the type 1 decision of life. You know, it is not a door you walk back through ever. And so I'm excited for you, man. I really am. I'm excited to watch. Yeah. Excited to watch your evolution into fatherhood. I feel like I feel like you're ready, you know, whatever that means. And I think when I say ready, I mean, nobody's ready for shit, you know, nobody's ready for anything.
So true.
But I think you can be ready for the journey, right? Of whatever it is.
Yeah. And I think of moments in my life where I sat at relational endings. You know, I can remember quite vividly a few of them, just being with myself and thinking I'd never love again, you know, especially the early ones when you've not made it through one yet, you know, you haven't been to the other side and been supported by Adele along the way, you know, and you never realize in those moments that you are going to be in a future moment where it's all going to make sense and you're going to have moved through that thing. And that's if we turn towards our relational challenges with openness and curiosity, and our pain with the same reverence and grace, that we can get to a place where we couldn't even fathom. And it's only through those portals or gateways or initiations that we adult, right? Like we start to become adults. I think it's fascinating to be in a culture that really doesn't celebrate initiations, you know, in a space of moving from, you know, in Jewish culture, they do, you have a bat mitzvah and a bar mitzvah, but very few cultures actually do that anymore. These transitions from childhood to adulthood. And I think because we lack initiations, we actually lack taking on the adult, like you're allowed to vote at 18, but which is, you know, kind of crazy to think you're allowed to do that when you haven't possibly even learned about a political system. You know, you think about all the things that are required when you grow up that we are often not prepared for. I think because we also have parents who haven't fully grown up. And I think we see that in the patterns of relationship that we witness, how we handle conflict. You know, speaking of what we inherit, I mean, so much of our challenges in relationship are really just patterns of behavior that were passed down. You know, much like the conversation about things like anxiety or depression, where someone will say, oh, well, anxiety runs in my family. Well, the genetic predisposition from a chemical basis was disproven long ago. But the behaviors that create anxiety are what we're inheriting. You know, the behaviors that create depression are what we're inheriting. And so it is, again, you know, I said it earlier, it's like part of the responsibility of becoming an adult is actually exploring those things, being curious about those things, and recognizing that, like, our biography is not our destiny, but it can feel like it is. But if all we've witnessed is people who their biography is their destiny, then that's what we'll believe is possible. And I think stepping into, much like becoming a father and having never been one, you know, that's an initiation I don't have a choice of crossing. That's a threshold that's going to happen. But when it comes to being better at relationship or letting someone go or setting boundaries, that's a threshold we can actually decide to never step across. And that means we'll just keep repeating our relational patterns, you know, which is very much why we founded Mind, is because we're like, hey, which is now Felt. Hello, Felt. But it's why we founded it, because we saw this desire for people to learn, but also a world that is both absent of relational awareness and emotional awareness, like in terms of trainings and knowledge and teachings, but also flooded with them at the same time, which is a strange paradox. But it's like, how do you ensure that you're getting good relational education? And how do you also ensure that that you have access to a number of different diverse types of teachings too, both from the teacher and the teaching?
So okay, let's switch gears. Let's move from parenthood a little bit. No, I loved it though. And by the way, just to circle back on one thing you said, as somebody who is Jewish and did have a bar mitzvah, I can assure you that I still am trying to figure out when I'm going to cross into becoming a man from being a boy. But I will sure to alert everybody when I get there. So okay, so you and I met because I was going through what I describe as kind of the pivotal relationship. And I've had a few, and, some are with my, family, and this happens to be the pivotal romantic relationship of my life. And it was that way for a plethora of different reasons that, it was right place, right time. And that led me to you and discovering your work. A friend of mine sent me a quote of yours that I loved, and I reached out and we started working together. And you really helped me through a really challenging time. And we decided that there was a bigger opportunity to help more people, because you were right at the end of, working one-on-one with people. In fact, I had to really weasel my way in. And it's been amazing to watch your evolution. I feel like you've had a major evolution, and I want to get to that evolution. But before we get there, I want to start with your most sort of profound, profound gives it too much credit, but, what was the relationship for you in your life that you really feel like shifted things, transformed you, broke something? Talk to me about that.
I could probably get into many nuanced moments in relationship from growing up, and just the experience that we have, moving through that delicate time of adolescence, especially puberty, things like that, where social hierarchy starts to be formed in grade, I guess around age 10, 11, 12. And I noticed that I used to coach soccer camps, and I noticed the difference of social hierarchy that was between the 5 and 6 year olds, the 7, 8 year olds, and then the older groups. And I think that was probably the first sort of experience where I felt rejected. And that was when I noticed a social hierarchy being created and I wasn't moving up it. I was looking up at it like, hey, right. I thought we used to be friends. And just how society valued, power in men and beauty in women, and, in different layers of all of that. But I'd say my first relational fracture was being cheated on. And that happened a couple times in a couple relationships. And those were, the one that really broke me was the second time that happened. And unconsciously, after that relationship ended, I made it mean that being monogamous meant being heartbroken. Like I grew up, standing in the line of integrity for my integrity, like what was true for me, what I valued, what I wanted from a relationship. And I'm sure there was a lot of socialization mixed in with that too. And when that relationship ended, I was like, fuck, I've been fighting so hard to stand in the truth of this integrity and da-da-da-da. And my buddies are having fun having one night stands and hooking up and, being celebrated in change rooms, you know, in sports. And I'm like, you know, no one's headed into the locker room and is like, damn, my partner and I have really dove a lot deeper in our monogamous connection. And, you know, like, it's just not, maybe that is what you hear now with Gen Z or Y or V or whatever the different gens are called now. That's dating me clearly because I don't know. But I think what's fascinating about what was fascinating looking back about that is how, because I didn't take responsibility consciously and with intention, what the betrayal meant about me. Like, I made it mean I wasn't enough. I made it mean I wasn't important enough to be chosen, to be honest with, to be able to trust. Because I didn't take an active role in what that story meant. It meant something that didn't serve me. And in a way it served me because it protected me from being hurt again. I could control the depth of intimacy by having one night stands. I could control the depth of intimacy by running from people who could love me. But ultimately I was running from what I most desperately desired, which was connection. I just didn't know why. And I did enter a 5-year relationship about 3 years after that. And when that relationship ended after an engagement, which I ended, I was like, how did I get here? Like, I feel like I'm disconnected from who I actually am. I feel like I've made all these choices to get here, but I feel like I wasn't making the choices. Like, I felt unconscious, a lot of what I was living.
Right.
And I was running from someone. I basically ran from any woman who wanted to love me for like 6 years, not even knowing that, maybe even 8 years, you know? And so those early relational experiences were probably the ones that really shaped my 20s and how I related. And it wasn't until my late 20s that I really was like, wait, which I think is what I think they call it I think it's your Saturn return in what's that world? Astrology. In the astrology world. Yes. I was like, what's that called?
Very good.
They didn't have a term. There was no Mercury in retrograde. Everything was your fault back then. But yeah, I look back and that was the moment that I really started to ask, why do I do what I do? And how did I get here? How did I create this? And why are we not taught about relationships? And then that led me to taking a journey to wanting to deeply understand the human experience and why we do what we do, and why we love the way we love, and why we seem to be absent of relational education, even though it's the most important skill. I'd say without even a doubt, it's the most important skill that will have the greatest determinant on your health. And yet there's not a single class in our schools growing up, which is fucking wild.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of that's starting to change now because people are awakening to this, but yeah, I mean, it is interesting because I think there's this expectation that being in relationship is part of our evolutionary kind of lineage, and that just like we kind of intrinsically know how to breathe and pee and poop and like eat, that there's kind of this naivete, this like expectation that we should just know how to be in relationship because it's part of our evolution. Like, we've always done it. That's how we got here, was people were in relationship and they made us. But I think what we're learning is there are so many more inputs now. And not only have we evolved as human beings from a technological perspective, but our emotional capacity as humans has evolved immensely. What we desire, I heard somebody talk about this the other day. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Jillian Turecki, actually, or Alexander Solomon, both amazing women in this space, if you don't know them. But one of them was saying, way back when you met a partner and you looked at that partner on a basis of, okay, if it's a guy, and I'm going to for a second, just because we're going back in time a little bit. But, if it was a man, could they provide? Could they protect? Could they bring home money? Right? Like there were those sort of things. And the sort of woman role was like, is this person going to be a good mom and going to be a good homemaker? Right? These like kind of very stereotypical things. And we've gone from this space of looking for connection in a way that makes logistical sense to like, does this make soul sense? Like, are our souls connected? And that's very different than the way we used to operate. And perhaps people felt that, I'm sure throughout time, people were like, God, like I desire more than this. But our language around it, we like finally have so much language around what we desire and what we want that, yeah, of course we can't just fucking pick this up from watching other people do it. By the way, watching other people do it mostly bad.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, it is interesting.
I think we inherited old world relationship skills that we're trying to use in a new world of relating. And
it's a great way to put it.
It ultimately, as you're saying, relationships were determined from a survival-based perspective. Marriage was actually never for love. If you look historically, right. Stephanie Coontz, the marriage historian, she talks about how, I forget which culture it was, but there was like a joke that basically, how crazy is it that you find love in marriage? That's where you find love in affairs, and you still, I think, see that culturally. You still see that in certain cultures that are like, oh yeah, go get your needs met outside, which when we project our own, whatever our culture says is the right way to relate, then of course that starts to infer judgment, and everyone gets to decide what kind of relationship they want to create. Just don't try to create the relationship you want to create with someone who wants to create a different type of relationship.
Totally.
And that happens a lot. Stan Tacken, who's a famous psychologist, talks about how the reason relationships fail is we fail to create explicit agreements at the beginning. But, it's kind of like if we look at all the things humans have done historically for evolution. If we didn't begin to question and develop new skills, we'd still be doing a lot of really bad things. And, I think is it the, I forget if it's a spider or the praying mantis that after they have sex, the female eats the male's head.
I think it's the praying mantis. Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, will one day the praying mantis wake up consciously to how it is actually behaving and that it's eating the partner after? Like, who knows? But I think,
but maybe it's got a point,
right. Well, and I think I know that's a dramatic example, but it really is just pointing to that the skills we've inherited sometimes on a actual behavioral, physical level are that undeveloped or that painful. But it can, like violence in relationships, things like that. And also from an emotional perspective, we have not developed the ability to handle conflict well often. We have, it seems so crazy to think that someone stays in a relationship with someone who is totally unhealthy. But that's only because we're witnessing it from outside. When that's all we've witnessed, especially evolutionarily, I mean, how do we know how to have boundaries or choose ourselves, right? Like, that's why I think we're in this time, as you mentioned, that never have we been exposed to more possible knowledge. Never have we been exposed to more possible partners. Like before, you grew up in a tribe or a small town, you had like a choice of two people sometimes, or one, or sometimes it was chosen for you.
Right.
Like, are you going to try to develop this? Like, you can't leave. So why develop the skills to be able to stay? You just learn to self-abandon.
Right.
And so I think we're in this really interesting time where we have more choice and we have more desire, and what you said, soul alignment. And maybe soul alignment was that you married one of the three people in your town, because you didn't know any different.
Right.
And now we have this paradox of choice, and it's like, it probably comes back to that same point of discussion is like, with so much choice, how do you now be grateful for what you have and develop the skills for more intimacy and depth?
I mean, I'm going to say something interesting that I have found anecdotally through my own kind of just being a bit of a observationist, but I'm from LA, okay? And most of my friends' parents are divorced, okay? And I live in New York, and I know tons and tons of divorced people here in New York. I know people from the suburbs of New Jersey, from
Are they divorced?
suburb.
Or did New Jersey make it?
They are all together. It is so
Dirty Jersey,
rare.
keeping it together. I like it.
But I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and it's just like when you grow, yes, we have so much choice and optionality, and there's so much stimuli. And when you grow up in a city, or you're in a major city, and I'm really generalizing here, but I do think there's something to this, which is that there is so much choice. Restaurants, the people, the entertainment, the excitement.
New York.
It's constant dopamine
Right.
when you live in one of these major cities. And I think it programs us to want to lean towards what is new and novel. And so, it's what's always fascinated me is because by the way, that I'm not saying that these people who I know that are together have the greatest relationship skills either. So it's interesting when you start to pull away what is our environment and what comes from within us, and starting to be very mindful of that, because I think we're now awakening from I have some agency over myself. I can do the inner work. I can get better at relationships. But part of getting better at relationships, in my mind at least, is also being aware of your environment and what kind of stimuli you're exposing yourself to and what kind of dopamine. And you and I did a podcast on your show all about social media, right? But it is not just the awareness of self from within, but it is the awareness of how self responds from the things that are outside us that I think is really interesting right now.
I think that's going to be the new skill set that separates some from others, is the ability to not follow the urge, the dopamine, what you're saying. I think that's really fascinating, because it's like biologically are we designed to be able to manage so many pulls of quick hit desires. It's interesting to think of all the different confounding factors that influence why people from New York and LA might have higher divorce rates than someone from Jersey or from rural, let's say, Oregon. I don't know. But it's fascinating because, like, one thing about New York is people on average feel more lonely because there's so many more connections around them that they're reminded more of what's possible that they don't have. And divorce as an actual choice is contagious. So, if like one person in a group gets divorced, it's more likely that the people around them are going to get divorced. But that's true of all habits. Like, smokers hang out with smokers. There's that saying that the average of the 5 closest people you surround yourself with. And when someone gets divorced, I think it just opens this possibility to someone else who might not be happy in the relationship, maybe was worried that if they left, they wouldn't be happy. They see someone else become happy. If you're surrounded by people who also walk through that cavern, which divorce could sometimes be the right choice. So don't hear me any differently there. I would never shame that choice. And sometimes staying is the right choice. But if we haven't witnessed a balance of both, then we won't know that both are possible.
Right.
So if we're in a group where everyone leaves the moment there's a challenge, then we'll think that's the right choice. And again, I don't want it to sound like I think staying is right or leaving is right. I think whatever anyone chooses is right for them. But it is only through hindsight that we can look back and gather information. And that's the way we understand the weight of something. And that's also how we understand the value of something, once we let it go. And I think in this time where we have so much stimulus to be pulled out of the present moment that the new superpower will be, which is ironic to think that it's a new superpower because it was just life before.
Right.
But the new superpower will be presence.
Yeah.
Will be probably, and I never would have said this before because I didn't have any, but I would say the new would be discipline too. Discipline to not say yes to the simple, easy. Are you kidding me? FOMO, addiction. Like, there's a reason I've never done any serious drugs. I would be on them right now. There's not any question, but with things like pornography and, like, I just think, like, fuck, if you're a 15-year-old boy, or maybe girl too, I'm not a girl, so I don't understand what the lens would be like from a desire perspective, but I couldn't imagine VR porn. Like, I won't even look at it because I know that I won't be able to, like, from a stimulus perspective, that would be too much. And yeah, it's interesting because that's true of, like, how TikTok is designed. That's true of, not that it's VR porn, but it's like designed to appeal. You talk about this, how it's like those platforms are content forward. Like, they don't care who you follow. They just want to give you content that keeps you on there. And all platforms seem to be moving to this. Even ones like LinkedIn, where they're presenting or suggesting things.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I think the dopamine thing is real. I can share my own experience of being a kid growing up in an era where porn was really, really accessible. And
mine took a lot of work
later in life
to download it.
Dude, it's crazy. I mean, growing up, because we grew up at the sort of, I grew up in the age of, I remember running the DSL line from my room into my parents' phone.
Damn.
And growing up half with the internet and half without as like a child. But porn was really accessible to me. It's funny you bring that up because, I stopped watching porn a while ago, and it was crazy what happened to me. It was crazy how I mean, we could do a whole episode on this, but just my relationship to sexuality and my body and gratification became so different, and things that didn't even have to do with anything sexual started to lighten me up again in a way that they hadn't before, because you become so desensitized. I mean, look, we could truly do a whole episode on this, because I think it's really wild. I want to ask you something, because you are about to have this baby with your now wife.
That's right.
Wifey, Kylie, who, you guys have had a really interesting relationship that, I've been fortunate enough to bear witness to, and it's been beautiful and amazing and hard and raw. And what's interesting about the evolution of your work is that, there's a lot of people who follow you because they need help with love. And it is so interesting how many people want to know how to get back together with their ex. And more often than not, the answer is they probably shouldn't, and it probably isn't going to work out. There's this old Arabian proverb, and by the way, I could be totally off on where it's from, but that's what my friend told me when they told me this proverb. So let's just go with it.
It's probably Irish.
The old Irish proverb. If you have a rope, like a really solid rope, and you cut the rope. Well, let me back up. You have a solid rope. You can't break that rope apart if you try pulling it apart. But if you cut the rope and you tie it back together, it's still probably pretty strong. But you start to make multiple cuts in the rope, and all of a sudden it becomes very easy to grab the rope and just pull the rope apart every time you try and tie it back together. I think it's very tough when you make a cut as big as, hey, like, we're not going to do this relationship anymore, at least in its current state. it's very hard to come back from that. It takes two amazingly committed people who are really willing to transform and change. But people have a lot of hope. And so I'm curious, let me start with how you and Kai navigated that.
How we navigated that breaking apart, or that like coming apart.
Yeah. How did you navigate breaking apart? And then how were you guys the minority that are able to actually not only come back together, but have a world's better relationship, I would argue, in doing so?
I mean, when we came apart, we had sort of exhausted every other choice, and we like done our own individual work. We looked at our pattern in the relationship, and it was like, there was really no other option at that point. And we came consciously to that choice in saying, like, we've done everything, and this is just not moving forward in the direction of like what I wanted to create, which was to have kids, kind of soon. And, I remember saying to her, like, listen, this is what I want to create. I want to do it with you. And if you want to do it with me, that's great. And if you don't, that's great too. Like, I love you no matter what you choose, but I'm not going to abandon the story that I'm here to create and live. And that was always pretty explicitly expressed through our relationship, but there kept being a delaying of the agreements of like, we're going to have kids, we're going to move forward. And the kid thing just kept being delayed. And the more I pushed on it, because I agreed to the delay the first time, and then the second time I was like, what's actually up here? Because I think when we move things that are deal breakers, when we try to renegotiate deal breakers, we're often not being honest about our capacity for that thing, or the truthfulness about our desire for that thing. And I just didn't want to be in a relationship where I was trying to convince someone to live a story I wanted to live. And that was a habit or a pattern that I needed to change. I was tired of fighting for love and fighting to be chosen. And she was tired of feeling like she didn't know how to choose or couldn't fully commit to things, or, that there was something wrong with her, that she couldn't show up to a relationship. And so for both of us to move apart and to choose to break up was actually like a really healing for both of us, because it was both the choosing of ourselves. And I think the other part too is because I'd left a relationship that was actually good and I didn't know why I needed to leave, that one that really broke me open in my late 20s. I actually understood where she was coming from, and I didn't want her to be made wrong for that. I actually, I wanted her to know that she was still loved, because for me, that was actually pretty painful, was that I felt not loved by other people because I chose to end a relationship. And so even in our friendships, our friendship group, there was no side taking. There was just, we love both of you and we want what's best for both of you. And we didn't participate in anyone even trying to be like, well, I'm mad at this person now, or I'm on your side. We're like, there is no sides. Like, we're in service of love here. So the ending was done with a lot of grace. It changed the whole paradigm. The reason I lived it more out loud than she did. She went into more of an internal process, but I really, because I was experiencing something I'd never really experienced to this level of depth and love and intention, I wanted to share with people that we did a closing ceremony and how intentional we were, that you can leave relationships, they can end, and love can still be present. And I don't think that's something that's modeled for us, that sometimes the most loving thing to do is end a relationship, and that's actually in service of each other. And I think being able to model that possibility was really healing it was definitely healing for me and for Kai, but I think it was healing for others. I have a podcast episode called Adulting is Hard that is about the closing ceremony. And it's a very emotional episode. So we handled it with as much grace and intention, and also just reverence for one another. There was no desire to hurt each other or like take anything out, because there was space to be able to communicate about it all, clear what we were upset about. And then we closed it and it was over and we were moving on. There was not I don't know if anyone else is like me, but I'm kind of like, bye. As soon as a relationship's over, I'm like, all right, like I'm moving forward, like I'm moving on with my life. And I think sometimes that can be a bad thing because we discard people or things because we're afraid of being re-injured by it. But with me, it was actually pretty intentional. Like I knew without a doubt that I was going to create the relationship I desired because I knew I was going to be part of the equation that created it. And whoever was ready to meet me in that space and create with the same level of intention would be there. And I wasn't concerned about finding them. I knew it would happen. And I think when we can get to that place of being in such alignment with what we want to create and with living each day with such integrity and intention, then we're not worried about who's going to show up in our future. So we don't care if it's our ex, and if it is our ex, it's because they've done the work to meet us in the future. There's that saying like, should we get back together? And I always reorient the language there. You should never have to go backwards to get into a relationship. The person that you're meant to be in a relationship will meet you as you're moving forward. And that's why a lot of us get back together with people and then go back into old behaviors and habits. And with her and I, when we decided 8 or 9 months later that we wanted to explore this container again, it wasn't just like we were radically in love and so excited. I mean, there was excitement to see what was going on there again, but there was a lot of repair that needed to happen. I didn't trust, she said, oh, well, I'm now ready to choose this. I'm now ready to, and I was like, I don't believe you. You used to say that all the time. And, right. And, she showed up as a totally different person, not totally different, but definitely different. And she said to me, I'm not going anywhere and I choose this. And she said that over and over again. And it was exactly what I needed to hear. So yeah, the coming back together was, I wish that for people that it's possible, but you do have to have the relationship completely end in order for that to be possible, in my opinion.
But don't you think people listen to this and they're like, first of all, like, what the fuck? Like, no way that they like changed in how long was it? 8 months?
Yeah, it was 8 months.
Don't you like, and again, who cares? This is nobody else's story except for yours. But
yeah, I mean, I'm open to anyone's criticism or thoughts. It doesn't matter to me.
It's less a criticism, more like a thought starter, which is like, how the fuck do you change that much? Like for people who are like, cool, like I want to grow that much. I'm ending a relationship right now. And whether it's back with my ex or with somebody else, like, how do I grow so much that if it were to be me coming back together with my ex, they'd be like, holy shit, like I feel like you're so different now.
Yeah. I mean, look, the beautiful thing about a breakup, which I've experienced now more than once, is that I don't think there's a more potent, more transformational container for like the ability to completely change. And maybe not even completely, but completely change relational patterns. Like you're out of one, whether you chose it or not. And so accepting that you're now out of a relationship and you're in between your patterns, you're not in a relationship now. So now you can explore your patterns and you can use the pain. You can use the heartbreak. You can use the grief. You can use the anger to say never again, and I'm going to find myself in those circumstances, in that pattern. And most of us actually don't take the time to do that. I mean, there's a whole world that markets to you so that you'll buy stuff so you don't pay attention to your pain.
Right.
But if you are willing to hit pause and explore the feelings and the patterns, you can decide that you're going to be an active, intentional contributor to what relationship you want to create. And the reason that transformation can happen so powerfully is because, well, one, for Kai and I to choose to end that relationship, and for some people, it might not be their choice, right? But for us to both choose it, that was a complete change of both our patterns. And so what happens, even if you decide that, even if you were left, even if you were cheated on, even if you just decide that you're going to change how you orient towards endings, you're changing a pattern. And just by doing that, you're starting to build self-trust. You're starting to say, hey, when shit hits the fan, or when life shows up in a way that's unexpected, I actually have my own back and I'm actually willing to learn from this. And by starting to own our feelings and own our circumstances and own our patterns, we develop a relationship with ourselves that's foreign for most people, which is the recognition of the value of how you feel. Your feelings are neither bad nor good. We just code them as bad and good because some feel great and some don't feel so great. But when you recognize the value of grief or the value of rage or the value of anger or the value of sadness, and you've used it to get information about your life, because really emotions are information about your environment, your circumstances, your choices, and you start to see them as that, then you're in a state of power that very few people are in. And so for us, because we both oriented to each other as teachers in the ending, and then using the information of the pattern from the ending to inform ourselves, and then using the space that we now found ourselves in to grow, to change, to say never again, we found ourselves back in each other's lives more intentionally and not in the same, we weren't in the same pattern anymore. And so that's why you can completely change at any moment if you decide to, and that's the beauty of, we were talking about the superpower of presence and discipline. If your previous pattern, which was mine, was to find solace in the bottom of a pint glass, or, that saying, to get over your ex, get under the next, not great advice, by the way.
Right.
If you change those patterns and actually see yourself as wise and brilliant and this opportunity, that's why I created the Breakup course, because the Breakup course is about walking you through this process that I know works because I've walked through it more than once.
Right.
And I have also walked thousands of people through it, that breakups are, in my opinion, the most potent vehicle for transformation.
So,
and one
I want to
that
go
often find our
go
lives
ahead.
a little too, I was going to say, and often one that finds our lives a little too many times sometimes.
Yeah. I want to go back to something you said, and then this is a perfect segue, which is ultimately at the root of all of this is our ability to feel and to recognize our feelings and to sit with our feelings. It is at the root and core of what makes us human, right? To feel deeply and be deeply felt by others. And, I've been doing a lot of, how do I put this? Well, psychedelic work and sort of shamanic meditative work. And one of the things that they say a lot is, as things come up, if you name me, you negate me. And I really love that, because emotions can be scary and can be heavy and can be a lot to handle. And we often do jump to naming them, to going, oh, this is bad emotion. Don't feel this. Go distract yourself. But I love this idea that instead of jumping to a name to say it's good or it's bad, to invite curiosity and to say, hey, what is this trying to tell me? What is this trying to teach me right now? And that is why we ultimately made this move from our company being called Mind, which is super cerebral and thinky, to Felt, which is at the core of what makes us human. And to me, the answer to all of our inner work is to be able to sit and get more intimate with our feelings. So, you've got this new Breakup course that just launched, which is super exciting. Tell people a little bit about what they can expect from that.
Well, yeah, the course is, we went into the studio and basically reshot and upgraded, I guess is the right term, the work of the process that I walk people through in breakups to get real with reality, and then take responsibility, and also ultimately use breakups as a healing and transformative process. In the program, where I bring people up, they ask questions, we explore their circumstances. What I love about that, and they might be my most, that's my most favorite part of these containers is that we learn through other people's circumstances, even if they're not the same. And I think that's what's so powerful about relationship experiences. We don't have to be in the same combination of genders. We don't have to be in the same circumstance. We can be just living something, but we could be in a similar emotional experience. And so we hear our own stories through the stories of others. And so that's a powerful part of the container. There's also a community. So other people, I mean, that's one thing that we learned from the beginning of creating Felt, is that people want to be surrounded by other people who, as you were talking about, witness them and understand them and understand what they're going through. And so we
dare I say, have been there, felt that.
Oh, I almost timed it at the same. But yeah, it's just a real, it's the support that one needs and the accountability that one needs. Often the reason we don't fully change or transform through breakups is we actually, one, don't know how the process or how to sit within the feelings. And we don't have other people holding us accountable to not like just jump right back into a relationship, to actually complete the work, to actually complete the exploration. And then, you know, I was saying Stan Tatkin's work is about how couples, the failure of them to last is because they fail to make agreements at the start. And so part of the course is actually creating a relationship vision and what you want to create with your life, so that you actually go out and live from that space. Because what I see so often when I'm talking to someone who's dating, I'm like, have you ever written down what you want? And they're like, no. And I'm like, why not? And they're like, well, I just know what I want. And I'm like, but you've never written it down. The reason it's so important to write it down is because otherwise we'll go out into the dating world and start to, especially if we have a pattern of doing this, we'll start to match what other people want in order to get connection and in order to enter a relationship. Because so we were talking about this earlier, one of the inherited relational patterns that we got from evolution and from love not being an aspect of relating is we got self-abandonment, where we place other people's needs, wants, desires ahead of our own. And we place the need to be in connection with other over the need to be in connection with ourselves. And so this is about, how do I re-enter the relationship world holding on to who I am? And when we talk about that, but one of the most important parts of that is actually getting very intentional about what you want to create in your life. And the best time to do that is right after you've left a relationship or one has ended, because you're very clear about what you want and don't want. And so we walk through even doing an audit of those things. And there's some pretty surprising things that come forward through some of the exercises that people have in the course, where they're like, oh, fuck, shit, there's so many pieces of clarity.
I mean, I am not going through a breakup actively, but I have done the course many times from having watched it many times. And even for someone not going through a breakup, I think there's like amazing tools in even defining what you want in your current relationship, or if you're dating in a future relationship, or just how to love yourself. So I it's funny, like, yes, it is a breakup course, and yes, it is probably most pertinent and impactful for people who are going through a breakup. But even for people who are not, I think there's so much good information there. I have one more question for you. And then every week we have people submit questions for our guests. We pick one question and we have you answer it as sort of a final tip of the hat. My question to you before we get to that is, for somebody going through a breakup right now, what is one piece of advice you would give them?
Well, I definitely go deeper into this in the course, but the first piece I would say is, you must, no matter what this means in terms of the choices you have to make, you must prioritize your own healing and yourself. And that is full stop. Like, that has to come ahead of everything. It has to come ahead of staying in contact. It has to come ahead of still following them or not following, whatever they're following you on social media. Being friends when you don't want to be. It has to come first. And it might be the first time in your life that you've ever prioritized yourself. And let me just say that will be one of the greatest gifts you get from your heartbreak, is knowing that you've always mattered and you always should prioritize yourself and your needs and your wants. And if that's what you learn through this process, it will completely transform your life.
Amazing. That's so good. Okay, here's our question. You ready for it?
I am ready.
Hi, Mark. I'm such a fan of your work. I love your podcast so much. My question for you is, do you think relationships take work? I've had past partners mention to me that, this shouldn't be so hard. We shouldn't have to put in so much work all the time. People have said, it's right when it's just easy. But then I also have friends in relationships that, they go to couples therapy, they have issues that come up and they work through it. So I guess I'm really just wondering, how much work is too much work?
Oh, it's such a good question. I think it's a question we often probably will, most of us will face. Like, is this worth continuing to invest in, or is it not? And that could be about work or relationships. That's often a choice point we get to. The first thing I would say is that different people will have, much like is expressed in that question, different people will have different expectations and experiences of what amount of emotional investment will be required in a relationship. So if you witness parents who talked it out and communicated with you and repaired, and you felt like you were really attuned to by a parent, you'll expect that in your relationship. That will be normal. If you had parents who totally dismissed your needs, maybe were never available, and maybe told you you're too much or too emotional, or kids are meant to be seen, not heard, then any amount of emotional, what you might call labor or an investment, will feel like a lot, especially if we don't have the capacity to have those conversations. So it really depends. I wish I could just give an answer to this, but I'd say the first part is you have to understand each other's definition of work. And you have to, all relationships take effort, and couples that are masters at relationship, it's not that they don't fight. I would actually say it's a fairly big red flag for a couple if they don't have any conflict. It's that great couples fight different. They fight fair. They repair. They seek to understand one another, as well as be understood, not just to seek to be understood. And, the other side of that is that sometimes people who have more of an anxious attachment style get nervous system regulation from trying to process things, from being in constant processing. And that is what is equated to safety. If they're in dialogue with someone, then they're still in connection with someone. And so I think it's just important for both people to explore their relationship to communication, their relationship to emotional processing. Because for someone who, when you hear something like, I feel like we're always talking about everything, you definitely hear that more from a male to a female in a heteronormative relational context. And that's one, because men are not socialized for a lot of emotional processing. It's not something that they experience a lot. It's not something they've developed skills around generally. So, and for women, a lot of connection has been socialized as like we talk through our feelings. And whether we could say those are both socialization, developmental, or actually inherent in our biological structure is probably a whole different conversation. But we got to deal with what we're dealing with. And so I think just being curious and exploring it. And then if we're someone who sources connection and safety through constant dialogue, to actually look for strategies to go to friends, to have a therapist, a coach, and to learn how to self-regulate, which is sit with our own emotions. For people who are avoidant, there's more of a fear of co-regulating. For people who are anxious, there's more of a fear of sitting with oneself.
So good. So good. I've learned so much from you. Listen, I love you. I love that we were able to squeeze this conversation in. I've loved watching your evolution, and being on this ride with you. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And where can people find you?
First off, for your inaugural hosting of a podcast, nailed it. Thank you for having me on your podcast, this podcast for Felt. And
It's really our podcast.
I mean, you're the host. And so, you know,
well, that's
I'm
true.
Inspired by your continued growth and leadership with Felt and your just deep passion to bring this stuff to the world too. And, you know, being able to do this with you has been a real honor. One of the greatest honors, to be honest, in my many years on the planet now. I get to say that. People can find me at Create the Love on Instagram. I have a personal Instagram called 8 Smart Groves too, where I get a little louder and more emotional about things. And then you can find the Breakup course at thebreakupcourse.com. Right.
And you can check out all things Felt at feelfelt.com or follow us on Instagram at feelfelt. Mark, I love you. It's been amazing. If you're going through a breakup, this is your guy. If you're not going through a breakup, this is your guy. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time.